Curiosity moves us.
It gets us across the street,
the city,
the region,
across state lines,
and party lines.
And from what we've seen along the way, we're in some very good company. Where the spirit of curiosity is not only alive and well,
it's how we discover all we share
in the public square.
We've spent the last 20 years connecting people to ideas
and to each other.
And we're just getting started.
We're always open,
always free,
and you're always invited.
Curiosity loves company.
Hi, thank you all for coming. My name's Thomas DeMello. I'm the gallery director for Bread and Salt. I just want to mention a few things. We have 5 independent galleries in the building, one of them of which is in the front here is the Bread and Salt main gallery, and we have our exhibiting artist here. His name's Brandon Eugene Seacrest. He's the guy in the cap right there. Please, if you have a moment after this, walk around the building, see all the galleries. Brandon's exhibition continues upstairs. So a little bit about Bread and Salt. We have a women-owned and operated brewery, Mujeres. They're serving drinks just out in the courtyard. There's the Athenaeum Art Center. There's Best Practice. There's Quint One, Ice Gallery, and the Bread and Salt main gallery. So we're delighted to partner with Zocalo Public Square, the MacArthur Foundation, and Times of San Diego to co-present tonight's program. I'm pleased to introduce Andrew Keats, the general manager and editor of Times of San Diego.
Thank you, Tom. I am Andrew Keats with Times of San Diego. We are a nonprofit news site dedicated to providing San Diego with high-quality original reporting in every community. We will be set up in a table out in the courtyard afterwards. Come sign up for our daily newsletter. We are also launching, right now, we're in the process of launching, a daily WhatsApp email blast, or daily WhatsApp blast in Spanish for the news of the day. That'll be a new product we're launching in February. You can sign up for that in the newsletter, or in the courtyard as well. And with that, I am as eager as everybody else to see this incredible program tonight. So I will turn it over to Moira Shourie from Zocalo Public Square.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Now the show begins. I'm Moira Shourie. Thank you, Andrew. I'm the executive director of Zocalo Public Square, a unit of Arizona State University Media Enterprise. At Zocalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org on podcast platforms and on YouTube. So please subscribe for our latest programs. We were founded in 2003 and are celebrating our 22nd year. Tonight's program is a part of our series, California 175. What connects California? On the 175th of California statehood, Zocalo Public Square presents a suite of free public programs across the state, bringing together leaders, thinkers from all walks of life to envision California's next 175 years. It also kicks off our new series, Brewing Ideas, featuring intimate, one-on-one conversations between experts of different fields on issues critical to the future of California in breweries, wineries, coffee shops, and tea houses. We hope you enjoy the offerings of Mujeres Brew House throughout tonight's program. Yes, cheers for Mujeres. We're thrilled to co-present this program with the MacArthur Foundation and Times of San Diego and Bread and Salt. I'll now introduce our first guest. Kelly Lytle Hernández holds the Thomas E. Lifka Endowed Chair in History at UCLA, one of the nation's leading experts on race, immigration, and mass incarceration, she is the founder of $1 Million Hoods, which maps the fiscal and human cost of mass incarceration in Los Angeles. She's also the author of several books: Migra, A History of the U.S. Border Patrol; City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles; and Bad Mexicans, Race, Empire, and Revolution in the Borderlands. Her forthcoming book is titled Still Racist, U.S. Immigration Controls Since 1790. Professor Lytle Hernández was named a MacArthur Genius Fellow in 2019. Welcome, Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. Good. Wow, I was just taking it in. There are so many friends. It's so good to see you all. Let us get started. We have a lot to talk about tonight. What we're here to talk about is where deportation comes from. And I'm going to open up with a short reading from a book that I published in 2017 called City of Inmates. But to do that reading, I want to tell you a couple of things first. First, I want to talk a little bit about this law that was passed in 1892 called the Geary Act. The 1892 Geary Act is passed 10 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act. Who knows the Chinese Exclusion Act? Hands up. There we go. So the Chinese Exclusion Act locks out Chinese laborers for 10 years. 10 years later, Congress comes back and does it again with the Geary Act, says no more Chinese laborers are allowed to enter the country. But in addition, the Geary Act says that every Chinese immigrant in the United States has to get a certificate of residency to be able to lawfully live in the United States. To get that certificate of residency, you have to get at least one white witness who will testify that you're a lawful immigrant. And if you don't get that certificate of residency, you're subject to at least a year in prison, to be followed by this new thing called deportation. That leads to a case called Fong Yu Ting. That's what I'm going to read about today, is the case called Fong Yu Ting. You ready? All right. On the morning of the hearing, members of the national press, some of the nation's most prominent lawyers, and a crowd of onlookers pushed into the courtroom. Deportation was on trial, and they occupied every available foot of space to hear the arguments. In the words of one journalist, Fong Yu Ting was going to be the greatest legal battle ever fought before the Supreme Court. Before a packed courthouse, Joseph Choate, the lawyer for Chinese immigrants, launched a 13-point attack on the constitutionality of the Geary Act. Among the first arguments he made was that the Geary Act violated the Fifth Amendment by empowering federal authorities alone to determine a Chinese immigrant's lawful status without a jury trial. The Fifth Amendment, he argued, guaranteed all persons the right to a jury trial when charged with a crime, that is, unlawful residence, and facing a criminal punishment, that is, deportation. Immigration control, suggested Choate, had taken a turn that demanded all the rights and protections of criminal proceedings within the United States. Next, he argued that deportation was a form of banishment and charged that it was a, quote, brutal, inhuman, and unjust punishment, one too severe for the act of, quote, unlawfully residing within the United States. Deportation, therefore, was a cruel and unusual punishment that violated the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution. However, the boldest claim forwarded by Joseph Choate against the Geary Act was that the congressional foray into deportation was, at its core, unconstitutional. No power is given to Congress by the federal Constitution to remove friendly alien residents, he argued. After giving a short history lesson on the writing of the U.S. Constitution, he argued that the framers of the document had considered matters of banishment and expulsion, but routinely denied this power to executive authorities. Therefore, it was by careful omission and intentional design that the framers of the Constitution, the fathers of our settler republic, affirmatively refused to create delegate, or allocate any congressional authority to deport. Deportation, therefore, was beyond the scope of congressional power and thereby unconstitutional. With this final charge, Choate rested his case against the 1892 Geary Act. So that is the end of this reading that will take us into a clip by my friend, Alex Rivera. You can clap, that's cool.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm pleased to introduce our next guest. Alex Rivera is an award-winning filmmaker whose work explores themes of globalization, migration, and technology. His first feature film, a cyberpunk thriller set in Tijuana, Mexico, is called Sleep Dealer, and it won several awards at Sundance and Berlin. Rivera's second feature, a documentary and scripted hybrid, is set in an immigrant detention center. It's called The Infiltrators, and it won the Next Audience Award and the Innovator Award at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival. Rivera's work has been supported by the Ford Foundation, Creative Capital, the Open Society Institute, and many others. He is an associate professor of filmmaking practice at ASU's Sidney Poitier New American Film School, and he is a 2021 MacArthur Fellow. He'll present a preview of his film in progress that is called Banishment.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's so great to see so many folks out tonight. Thank you for coming out, and thank you, Zocalo, and all our hosts for putting this conversation together. So tonight is a bit of an experiment. I'm working on a film inspired by Kelly's writing, and normally filmmakers and the people working in the kitchen of the film kind of speak secretly, and then eventually the film comes out. But we're kind of, because of the urgency of these topics, bringing all of you into a bit of our process and our dialogue together as comrades and as friends, and myself as a student, in a sense, of the history that Kelly has produced. In that spirit, I'm going to share with you a bit of where the work is. When I make a film, I work on paper, I write, but I often work on a kind of sketch pad with images, kind of testing them out and seeing how they feel. And so what I'll share here is about 6 minutes of this work in progress based on Kelly's book. In the film, you'll see it's this kind of unholy collage. There's material from modern-day newsreels, there's stuff from the historic archive, and there's a substantial amount of images from the dreaded AI, which we can perhaps talk about later if anyone wants to. But the intention here is to start to get a grip on this character, to get a grip on the structure of the film, and to start to lay it out. So I guess with that, I'll share 6 minutes of Banishment, a work in progress.
When we reached California, they saw a threat, an invasion. They want us to carry tags, like dogs. If we don't get our tags, we're thrown out, deported. I walked into the U.S. Marshal's office. I said it. I'm here to not register. I'm here to be deported. Since I got here, I've been having strange thoughts, strange dreams. I keep wondering, what if we lose?
Thanks so much. And strange feeling to share the sketch pad with such a large audience, frankly. But thank you for bearing with the idiosyncrasies of the work in progress. Well, now we're going to move into the conversation, and just a heads up that we will be taking questions in about 30, 40 minutes. And so I think you should have wristbands, and you can text to the number on your wristband to submit a question, or you can line up over there by Moira as well. But just to start and as a kind of icebreaker, I thought I'd ask my friend Kelly, because I don't think I've ever actually asked, where did your interest in immigration and borders come from? And we'd start sort of where at the beginning.
That's a good question. So I'm from San Diego. I grew up in Claremont, and I graduated from La Jolla High. So I'm from the borderlands, as we all are. And I grew up here in the 80s and the early 90s at a time, as you all, I'm sure many of you remember, when the Border Patrol was like everywhere, right? Before Operation Hold the Line, before they went down to the border, they were all over community. And I remember as a kid seeing them snatch folk. And I'm not from an immigrant community or from an immigrant family. It terrified me, the idea that they could come and snatch folks, and certainly had friends who lost family members to deportation. And so it was growing up here in the border region that made me intensely curious about why it was, which to my eye was very clear, the Border Patrol was going around and picking out very particular people, right? Racial profiling to me was plain as day, but nobody was talking about it. It seemed as though it was accepted or normalized, but it wasn't for me. It didn't make any sense, right? And so that, I think, for me, has been an eternal question that just sat in my belly from the time I was a kid, all the way through graduate school, and now, more than 20 years as a professional historian, trying to figure out and untangle these questions of race and immigration control in particular. So I think that's, for me, my story. What's yours?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for me it was as a young adult when I started to realize that person in the news in the 1990s, because for me, my kind of awakening around these issues was in the early 90s when I was a young man, and realizing that the illegals, the invaders, the targets of this machine that was rampant in the 90s was us, was my family, was my cousins. I realized that I had undocumented cousins, and I saw that reality up close, and the reality that I saw in the people that I loved didn't square at all with the story being told in the media, the story being told by politicians, and certainly not the story being told in film. And so I kind of found a bit of a life mission, I guess, to try to push into the space of film and try to work in that borderlands terrain and try to do something else, try to tell aspects of truth or stories that might have some authenticity or some dignity. And it's been a growth market ever since then. The 90s, the kind of convulsion around immigration enforcement, then, at least the way I've experienced it, it's kind of gone up and kind of gone down, but up and down, but always up. Like the wave is on a sort of upward trajectory, and right now it feels like we're at some kind of a, who knows if it'll be a peak or where we will look at this moment, 20, 30, 40 years from now. I hope it's a crest and maybe better times are ahead, but nonetheless, this work of trying to think critically about the border and immigrant lives has been incredibly vast, and feels like we can have many people putting their life work into it. So, and so I think that's kind of where how I got started. And but to go back to the matter at hand, let's go back to Fong Yuting, and we're going to spend most of our conversation time back there in the 1890s, really trying to understand this moment. And I guess just for super clarity as a starting point, every deportation today rests on this case of Fong Yuting. It's sort of that simple. This was the moment when that power in its modern form was created in the courts. And I've had the unfortune of being around a deportation and looking at the court records, and you see these cases from the 1890s cited. So this is the legal linchpin under everything that's happening today. And so I thought we'd start with California, because this event, I think it was mentioned, is around commemorating the 175th anniversary of California's statehood. And so, Kelly, my understanding is this story, the way you tell it, because City of Inmates is about the rise of what you call human caging in California, mass incarceration. And but this story unfolds in New York and DC, but the way you tell it, it really begins in California. So maybe could you paint like a picture of what was happening in California in the 1880s, 1890s, when the Geary Act is put into effect?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can do that. And you just asked a historian a question about the 1880s and 90s, which means I need to go back to at least the 1850s to answer that question. Right, so California is a leader in the demands for this thing called deportation. And that is because of Chinese immigration. Most Chinese immigrants who arrived in the United States in the 19th century came through San Francisco in particular. Most resided in and around San Francisco or in California. And many of the Anglo-American settlers in California believed in this fantasy of manifest destiny, which we are now seeing reposted on social media by the Department of Homeland Security through the John Gast image, which is so famous about the white woman in a white dress pushing across the American West and the native folks are being disappeared, right? So it's this fantasy of manifest destiny that many people in California are holding on to, trying to make real, and they feel threatened by the arrival of Chinese immigrants, which begins during the California Gold Rush and only continues to grow through the Transcontinental Railroad. I think a lot of us learned this in California history. So in California, people start to say, well, look, you know, we got to start passing some laws to make it really hard for Chinese immigrants to even step off a boat and to get into California. And so, in fact, it's in the 1870s, in 1874, that the California state legislature passes a law banning lewd and debauched women from entering the state. Their intention always was to enforce this against Chinese women. It's important to get the women out first. Why? They have babies, right? So 1874 is right after the ratification of the 14th Amendment. Birthright citizenship is at that point a right to all children who are born in the United States. And so they start with the women in 1874. They pass this lewd and debauched law. They enforce it only against Chinese women. And Chinese immigrants are so badass. They organize, they hire lawyers, they take the state of California to court. And in a ruling that goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, it's called Chai Lung v. Freeman. The ruling's issued in 1875. The United States Supreme Court says, you know what? We now have the 14th Amendment, which prohibits, not only gives birthright citizenship, but prohibits states from violating the due process or equal protection rights of all persons in the United States. So the Supreme Court says, you're right. This lewd and debauched women law that's only enforced against Chinese women is a violation of their equal protection rights. It's over. California, you cannot ban Chinese immigrants from entering the country anymore, right? We now have a 14th Amendment. However, the 14th Amendment at this time does not apply to the federal government. So what they decide in Chai Lung v. Freeman is that they're going to move immigration control out of the states and into the federal government. So why is it now that the federal government has so much power over immigration control? It was in an effort to skirt the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and make it possible to continue to ban Chinese immigrants. And immediately, as the Supreme Court issues its ruling in Chai Lung v. Freeman, Congress passes the 1875 Page Act, which, what? Targets lewd and debauched women It bans them from entering the country, and this law is almost entirely enforced against Chinese women. My whole point here is I'm getting there, I promise. My whole point here is there's a movement happening out of California that is reshaping our entire legal framework around immigration control. And that campaign is all around this fantasy of manifest destiny and working out the system through Chinese immigrants and Chinese bodies. But in time, as we know, this framework has now been applied to all immigrants, right, who encounter the U.S. immigration system.
And the Geary Act is passed in reaction to these demands by settlers here in the West to call out the population, and it's fully a racial control effort, or for folks who might say the immigration system is a racial control system. Is that reading between the lines or reading the text, or to what degree is this an explicitly kind of racist attack? The Geary Act and this moment in the founding of the immigration system.
Oh, I mean, the congressional record and even the Supreme Court rulings, Chai Lung, Fong Yuting, Che Chan-ping, all of them are littered with really vile language against Chinese immigrants as being a menace to our society, to being dirty and pagans and all of that. This is very clearly a racial project to create a white state, a white golden state, by keeping out Chinese immigrants. Now that's really interesting though. So are there any grad students here? A couple grad students, okay, all right. So one thing I think we need to be looking into is we've looked at Chinese exclusion as being about sort of societal bias around religion or race in a basic way. What I'm really curious, scholars, young scholars, is what was the labor control function in immigration control? We now know today that immigration control, one of the things it does is to subordinate and control a racialized work group, a low-wage work group in particular. I'm really curious to hear more about what was happening with Chinese immigrants as workers in the state of California. They're about 10% of the state of California. They are the largest non-white population in California at this time in the 1880s and 1890s. How was the creation of this new immigration system, this thing called deportation, one, a project of getting them out, but two, a project of subordinating when they're here, making sure they're cheaper workers, they're more compliant workers, they're more marginal workers, and historians haven't looked into that part yet. So that's a PhD out there that needs to be written.
Yeah, no, it truly, when I read this chapter, it shocked me, and maybe I was naive, but it shocked me to my core that our whole deportation system legally, in terms of precedents, rests on these cases that were so pernicious, so sort of barbaric in their impulse. They were ethnic cleansing or racial exclusion regimes. That's the foundation that this system rests on. And for me, that was shocking. But as a filmmaker, the other thing that drew me to this story was the characters, right? And so maybe we could just speak a little bit about, maybe do you want to just fill in a bit the cast of characters around this case? Geary, what we know about Fong Yuting, Choate, just the people around it, just little bits about them.
Sure. Okay, so Geary, I'm forgetting his first name right now. It's not Frank Geary. Let's not get them confused. What's his face? Geary from Santa Rosa, California, was like this dough-faced, pudgy man. I'm going to talk shit about him because I don't like him, right? I don't really feel any way about these things. So he was supposed to be like a big jokester, kind of fun to be around, but he also was intensely anti-Chinese, as many people were in the state of California at that point. And he leads the charge in not just re-upping the Chinese Exclusion Act, but trying to double down on it in ways that would make sure that the Chinese immigrants who were already in the country had to go.
Because exclusion was excluding at the borders, excluding entry. But Geary adds, if you're here inside, we could throw you out.
That's right. Yeah, the Geary Act adds deportation. So that is Geary. I mean, the other big law that he gets passed that year is a law that is opening up the Klamath River Reservation so that white settlers can take more native land. I mean, that's who this dude is, right? He's working on all the corners. So that's Geary. I think anyone from San Francisco, I think there's a street named after Geary. Yeah, that's him. That's the guy. So if you, Thomas Geary, you got it. Thank you. Google machine, very well done. So that's Thomas Geary. Joseph Choate, who is the lawyer hired by Chinese immigrants. And then when I say hired by Chinese immigrants, I'm not like talking about 12 individual people. The Chinese 6 companies were a group of like mutual aid organizations that collectively saw to the well-being of Chinese immigrants when they were in the United States. Helped them get jobs, helped to navigate, hospital, all that kind of stuff. Part benevolent, part coercive, all those things. The Chinese 6 companies cull the resources of the community. They say, everybody's got to put in $1. If we're going to fight this law and win, we need a purse to hire a legal team. So they raise money, and they hire the best lawyers in the country. Joseph Choate is the head, you were just telling me earlier, the New York Bar.
The most powerful law firms in the country, the head of the New York Bar.
I mean, he had argued many cases before the Supreme Court, so this is no small potatoes lawyer, right? He is the one. So they bring in Joseph Choate to argue this case. And then Fong Yu-ting, as you talked about here, was a resident of New York and joins this. The Equal Rights League is a civil rights organization that is founded in New York, and he becomes a member of it pretty quickly after the Geary Act, and does the incredibly brave thing of saying, I will go and break that law. I will submit myself for arrest. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I'm willing to test this law to see if we can break it for all of us. That's who he was. He didn't leave behind a diary. He didn't leave behind a lot of records. We don't know much in his words, but by those actions alone, I know we're talking about a forceful, formidable human being who took a risk with his own life for the well-being of others.
Yeah. No, the characters are extraordinary, and to me, the act of just knowing that, or I guess knowing that the first person to face deportation in this country was an activist who volunteered for it to try to stop the system before it got started, and this kind of fusion of the deportation system to the resistance against it. And that from its very beginning, it was a system that many people, and in the character of Choate, serious establishment people, leaders and titans in the legal field, thought this system was brutal, unreasonable, and had no place here. And so just that to me was like shocking and fascinating and worthy of amplification. And some folks here maybe know my film Sleep Dealer, but I'm interested in science fiction and interested in the speculative. I'm interested in film's ability to stretch out what we think is possible. And for me, that's kind of what this project is about, is looking back at this past to stretch out what we know of as possible today. And one of the things that's been interesting looking at it is obviously this case is being litigated in 1893, but Choate and the rebel immigrants are calling back to earlier histories, right? They're making their case at the Supreme Court based on what the framers of the Constitution said. And I guess could we just talk a little bit more, just so people just go, because that was in your reading, but let's go just a little deeper into the case and what Choate was asserting in court, why this legal titan thought deportation itself was unconstitutional. What was he calling into the courtroom in terms of from the past?
Yeah, sure. So, lawyers in the room, I know there's one right there. Where in the Constitution does it delineate the powers of deportation? Nowhere. it is nowhere to be found in the United States Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, as written, did grant to the federal government a requirement to put together a naturalization system or law. And that first naturalization law was the 17 Naturalization Act, which did what, fam? Limited the right to naturalize to who? Free white persons. So that was the very first naturalization law. The U.S. Constitution also provides for a Fugitive Slave Act. It prohibits, and you talk about migration and people's freedom to move and to migrate. It also bans the transatlantic slave trade, or prohibits the banning the transatlantic slave trade for 20 years. So in terms of migration, those are sort of the provisions in the Constitution that have to do with protecting slavery, right? And creating pathways to citizenship for free white persons. Well, so the racial bars on naturalization end in 1952, but what you are indicating is the end of Chinese exclusion in particular, which I think is 1943. That is right. I love this. We could do this all night, you and me. So it's not in the Constitution. That is his point. It's like, if the federal government was not granted this authority in the United States Constitution, you can't have it. And so at a moment in the 1890s when, the federal government really hadn't been in this game, it's a daring move for the federal government to say, we can run around town and round people up and kick them out. And that's what Choate is calling them to the carpet on.
Right, and he invokes the writings of Jefferson and Madison, and this is stuff, again, that shocked me or stunned me, was that Choate is looking, because there's the Constitution, of course, but then there's writings by these men on the sidebar, letters and other writings, and that Jefferson and Madison wrote extensively about deportation. They knew it was a possibility, and they wrote about it, and they were against it. Now, they were slaveholders. These were fraught and problematic people in so many ways. But in terms of this kind of limited question of the federal government's power to expel friendly immigrants, immigrants from their workplaces, from their homes, it was something that was considered, discussed, and there's a pretty deep written record that it was rejected on purpose. And so Choate is, and my understanding, is calling this all into the courtroom. And well, I guess to keep pushing forward, the third act, the people might be wondering, well, what was the conclusion of this case? And so, well, can you tell us how it ended?
I get to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. So the Fong Yu Ting ruling is issued in, I think it's May of 1893. And it not only says, yes, the federal government can deport people, it also says that that power to deport is like extra constitutional. The Constitution doesn't apply. That, in fact, the federal government's powers to deport rest under something called plenary power. Anyone heard that word before? The lawyers, no fair, you don't get to say that. Plenary power is rooted in the federal government's sort of sovereign, inherent powers. And so because it rests there, the Constitution doesn't apply. So in that ruling, they're basically saying the federal government can go out, round people up, put them in cages, kick them out, without having to consider constitutional guardrails at all. Not at all. Can we talk about the dissents? Can we get into that? So there's 3 phenomenal dissents in the Fong Yu Ting ruling, issued by 3 of the justices on the US Supreme Court. And they're like, are you out of your mind? Are you saying that federal authorities can run around here, put somebody on a boat, and send them out to sea, and that's going to be totally cool? And the court was like, yeah, because it's plenary power. It's totally cool. So for me, in the last year, as we've been watching people get sent out to El Salvador, Djibouti, to other places, I am feeling like I'm watching a 19th century playbook coming straight out of Fong Yu Ting when they're creating this power, and the others on the court are going, we can't do this. The Constitution has power everywhere in the territory and over every person in the territory. We can't cross this barrier. But we did. We crossed that barrier in Fong Yuting. Not only is deportation lawful, it happens under the government's plenary powers. There are no constitutional guardrails. There's more to the history, but that's where the ruling leaves us in 1893.
And that to me, when I was reading the chapter, that was what sealed it when I said, this is a story I want to uplift in a film, was that there were these three dissents, that there were three of these justices who said, this is not going to turn out well. It's a violation of our values, and there should be no such thing happening here, full stop. And this court was known as the Fuller Court, right? And the Chief Justice Fuller was one of the dissenters, which again adds even a little more power to these dissents. But maybe just to conclude this sort of depiction of this moment, could you speak a bit about this court, just who's on it, big picture, and what its place is in history, especially concerning questions of civil rights?
Yeah, so let's not get too confused here. Even the folks who are dissenting in Fong Yuting are some hardcore white supremacists for the most part. What they're concerned here, I'm going to talk about Justice Field in particular, Stephen Field, was a follower of substantive due process. He really believed in due process once it was within the territory to every person who was in the territory. And so that was a limit for him. However, he was also a rabid anti-Chinese advocate, and he's the person who set up the Chai Lung ruling so that the federal government could find a way of keeping out Chinese immigrants. My point here is the court is not, even though they're issuing dissents, it's a very complicated court during this time period. This goes on more or less to be the same court that gives us the Plessy v. Ferguson ruling. So with a grain of salt, the dissents.
Yeah, but it's to me it was striking because this was a court that upheld other aspects of Chinese exclusion, upheld segregation, and even for them, this power of deportation looked dangerous on paper. It was a bridge too far for nearly half the court, which is again just to me was really interesting, kind of astonishing. In terms of film and like pivoting, I guess, to the question of the representation of immigration, border stories. What are you? How are you feeling about where we are in the telling of these stories in the popular mediums of film and television? Is there stuff you're looking to, either aspirationally that you love, things you wish you were seeing? Things you're sad we're seeing so much of?
That's a good question. Well, of course, Infiltrators is probably my favorite film on immigration and rebellion by far. I honestly don't know how to answer that question. I mean, film and TV is your lane more than it is mine, and so I want to hear your answer to that. What's happening that's good and what's happening that's not so good. I will say that we live in Los Angeles, and I constantly hear from friends in the business and the industry that there's no content. And I think that this country's migration story, as diverse as it is, has got to be an incredible archive of content that's been almost entirely ignored or overlooked. And so I would love to see more migration stories told, historical dramas or whatever they might be. Yes, that has to do in particular with non-white migrants and what they've experienced here in this country. So maybe could you tell us what some of the good stuff is that you're seeing?
No, I mean, I guess, I would point to, Jean Guerrero's recent op-ed in the New York Times on the role of all the citizen or community documentation happening of this moment in terms of all the people, some who've made it a project of theirs, some who are just moved in the moment to take out a camera and film the actions of ICE across the country. And it's this, we're living through some things that are familiar to us, this type of roundup of people. It's not the first time it's happened in history, but it's the first time it's happened with everybody having cameras in their pockets. So we're, in a sense, experiencing a kind of a collective documentary hallucination in a way that is the thing that has sort of as far as what I've seen, the most vibrancy and integrity. Hollywood and the industrial film system has been, very obsessed long-term with, I think Dr. Bill Naricio here has the term narcheology, about like unearthing the history of the narco, but the sort of narco obsession of Hollywood is obviously propelled so much of the border drama and is really dovetailed with the rhetoric from this administration in dangerous ways. So there is a community of filmmakers who come from immigrant families that are telling those stories, and then there's this legion of counter documentarians of the people of the streets that is producing every day, right? And we don't fully know how that's going to play out, but it's exciting to see, and it's a huge question where it goes.
So that's really interesting that there's so much content that's being produced right now by people with their phones and more. But when you're making this film, it's about the 19th century, and there were no phones and not many even photographs. So how are you moving this text, right, of history and putting it on film? How are you? Are you finding images, or are you creating them? How are you doing that?
Yeah, no. So the question of visualizing history is one that's always complicated. Obviously, like the Hollywood industrial film deals with it through production design, through sets, through wardrobe, hair, makeup, and you kind of recreate the past. And I hope to do some of that. Ultimately, what you saw on the screen was a lot of the 1890s was recreated through this kind of AI blender, where it's taking different images and kind of, I'm sort of coaxing it to produce these images. But when we finally finish the script, we'll reshoot that material with actors and on some kind of a set. But the question of the archive, the visual archive from this time period, is really interesting, because in the 1890s, in terms of the history of photography, right, there's no moving images, but in terms of photography is being kind of institutionalized in the 1890s. We get the development of the mug shot, and Chinese immigrants are some of the first masses of people, large communities that are photographed systematically. And so there's actually a pretty deep archive of the faces of immigrants from this time period, but they're kind of looking straight into the lens. It's that kind of mugshot form. We have a much thinner archive of daily life, of street life that exists, but it's much, much less compared to the archive of the point of view of power, right?
So when you're doing a historical drama or film like this, what is the line between the archive as we know it and then your ability to sort of fill in the gaps? Or, how do you balance the two? Because you were trying to teach history through film, right?
Yeah. Well, bringing the history you and many and other scholars have lifted up, bringing it to life is the mission. And in terms of the line, there is no border. It is a blur in terms of that. There's the historic record, and then there's the visual record, and then there's what we need to do as storytellers to lift it into this medium. And for me, this medium functions at its kind of most powerful level when it's functioning psychologically, when it's inviting the audience to identify with someone, not to look at them, but to look at the world through them. And so for me, that's, in this clip, it's about that first person point of view, the voiceover, inviting you in. And so what I'm trying to do is read what you've written, read what is in the historic record, and then assume Fang Yuting is kind of like people we know, activists we know, undocumented folks who've stood up to authorities today and bring that knowledge, the human stuff from today, and kind of animate this character from the past and do the best we can. And so that's the joy of the process.
I just want to ask, I probably have time for just one more question to you. And so if you all don't know, Alex and I are dear friends. So we spend a lot of time in our families having dinner together and talking late into the night, maybe with some tequila or mezcal, I don't know, maybe. But you've spent at least 5 years on this project. What is it that drives you in this project? What is it you hope people learn? What is it you want to share with the world? Because you have a great energy for it. And what is it that you want to share with the world?
No, I mean, I think for me, for my adult life, I've been making films about immigration and being around people struggling around the immigration system, feeling its pain, seeing its violence, but not fully having a language for anything else. You know, and to me, I feel like that's where I feel like there's a collective hunger to make a type of sense that we don't have. And the sense is we see people getting tackled in the street by these masked agents today, but 2 years ago, they were getting grabbed methodically in their homes or at their workplaces by agents without masks. The children who are missing their parents who were deported by Trump are suffering the same as the children who missed their parents who were deported under Biden or under Obama. I don't want to return to 2 years ago. I want to imagine and push towards a world without any of this. And, you know, and to me, so looking at this moment in history and this kind of maybe it's not fragile. I might be exaggerating. Lawyers in the room can fact check this, but my sense is this system depends on these Chinese Exclusion Era cases. They're terrible cases with racist intent, patent in the language, and these kind of conservative legal titans of the time were like, no, this does not make sense. And so to me, like looking at Roe v. Wade, right? When that case happened at the Supreme Court 50 years ago, anti-abortion activists kept their laser focus on it for 50 years. And people telling them, shut up, it's settled, shut up, it's settled. They fought for 50 years to overturn that, and they did. Shocking. And also, like, what audacity and persistence. And so to me, the case of Fang Yuting, these Chinese Exclusion Era cases, are in a sense, maybe that's something we can think about or talk about or fight around or something. I don't know, but I want to imagine a world where no one is put in a cage for the act of moving. That to me seems horrific. I think Fang Yuting thought it was horrific, and many of the allies did. And so lifting that moment up so that then we can all talk about it, I think is the work you did, and it's the work I hope to amplify. But also, we know this issue of immigration stirs people up. It's kind of the red hot center of this nation's political discussion right now, and we're open for questions and super curious what folks are thinking. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. So you can line up through the center aisle and just make your way here, and I will hold the microphone while you ask a question. I have a question that came in from text message to get us started. How do you see the connection between the Gary Act and the anti-Chinese sentiment to the incarceration of Japanese Americans in the 1940s? Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a direct descendant, for sure. I struggle with this question sometimes, in the sense I want us to remember that the vast majority of people who were sent to camps, internment camps, concentration camps during World War II, were US citizens. It's actually not, it is an immigration story, yes, but it is a citizenship story. And so I want to also make sure that we're remembering that component, that these are US citizens who were stripped of their citizenship rights, sent to camp, and if they didn't go, were incarcerated, sent to prison. So it's a direct descendant, and I want us to talk about that as a civil rights issue around citizenship.
We have our first question. Please say your name. I'll hold the mic.
Yes, hi. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Roger Casares, and my question is, who gave you two the authority to speak on our behalf on occupied Kumeyaay land?
Right on. Nobody did. Nobody did.
I'm not yeah, in the sense that I don't actually know the Kumeyaay. The story is. Can you tell me a little more?
You don't understand my question?
No, I'd be happy to hear a little more.
Well, I'm sorry if you don't understand my question, but I'll repeat it. Who gave you two the authority to speak on behalf of the people on occupied Kumeyaay land?
Nobody did, and I agree with you 100%. That this is occupied territory, this is Kumeyaay territory, and we are here as visitors, and we should have approached you and asked for the right to be here and to speak. Absolutely. I don't disagree with you, sir.
Well, thank you. That was an honest answer, but it remains a question that had not been answered.
It has not been answered, and I very much want to take that journey with you. I very much want to take that journey with you. I think that that is the core question that we need to get at in all of our social justice work. That unless we go there and have that conversation, there is no justice for any of us. So I'm glad that you raised that as one of the first questions.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
I'm Jonathan McLeod, and I live here in San Diego. I'm a product of UCLA's history department with my doctorate, studied under Dr. Alexander Saxton. You probably know of Saxton's name. A great book for you to look at is The Indispensable Enemy, which was Alex's dissertation, written in about 1968. The Indispensable Enemy, a wonderful title. I did a master's thesis when I was a student at UC Davis, called California's Unemployed, 1890 to 1900. And I looked at the role of unemployed workers in California struggling to contend with the social, economic, and political forces in the state during the worst depression until the 1930s. And one of the issues that came up was the anti-Chinese movement. And missing from the discussion today, which I think is critical for our understanding the broad history, but also for that film to get the complexity, the nuances. You haven't talked about class. And one of the, class and race often work against one another in terms of solidarity. One of the key issues was that white workers in the East, particularly cigar workers, became very angry about Chinese cigar workers. You've heard of cigar labels? You know what the first cigar label said? White made. Those were the cigars from the East Coast, and they were attacking the Chinese cigar makers in the West. And so having white-made labels was really attractive. And it was the organized labor movement, AFL-CIO, Samuel Gompers, cigar maker president, and AFL-CIO president eventually. AFL president, not CIO. AFL.
Can I answer this question for you? I know where you're going. Yeah. And I got something that's going to blow your mind. Yeah. You ready? Yeah. Okay. So, I disagree with you on the point about class versus race. I am a disciple of Cedric Robinson. I think there's only racial capitalism, right? In the sense that race is the way in which we create a logic for extracting profit out of laborers and work and dividing. So I think that, that's theory. We don't have to talk about that. I want to tell you a little bit of history that might blow your mind. Fam, we talked today about Chinese exclusion. absolutely the basis of our modern legal framework when it comes to deportation. But I want to tell you about the very first federal immigration ban. That was passed in 1803. And that law targeted free black people for exclusion. Any ideas why Congress's very first immigration ban passed in 1803? The Haitian Revolution, you called it. The Haitian Revolution begins in 1791. Haiti was previously known as the French colony of Saint-Domingue. It was the most profitable European colony on earth by far, the sugar plantations in particular. When the enslaved rose up and threw out the colonizers in 1791, the United States, the Jeffersons, the Madisons, all of them got real shaky. They're like, wait a minute, this contagion of freedom, this contagion of emancipation might come from Saint-Domingue and arrive here in the United States. They start passing all these state laws saying, no free black people, no free black people, no free black people. Because you might come from Rhode Island, but you also might come from Saint-Domingue. They're afraid that just the example, just the word of freedom coming out of Saint-Domingue would incite the enslaved in the United States or help them to organize. My point here is that this country's very first immigration ban was both racist and about subordinating labor. It was the two things all together. That's about protecting slavery. So I just want to say I agree with you, but you know, in terms of solid, we could do it later. Yes, absolutely.
Darwin Fishman, he, him, his. Two quick things. First, putting my political hat, Racial Justice Coalition San Diego. We're part of the mobilizations. Folks don't know about it. Thursdays against ICE raids, every Thursday at 10 a.m. at the federal building. And then also the mobilizations, I want to make sure everyone knew about this. Sundays, 2 o'clock at Otay Detention Center, Otay Mesa Detention Center. And there is where people are being held from the ICE raids. And literally, we have conversations with folks led by the communities, and you can literally hear people crying, screaming. And I really encourage folks, if they're still strong about this issue, come out and join us in these actions. And then the second thing I wanted to say real quickly, put my academic hat, is the part you just referenced. I was waiting for that about the connection with other racial groups, because to me, that's the most powerful argument about deportation, and especially in terms of a racial filter. It wasn't just in that sense isolated for Asian Americans, but the way it worked out for all these other different groups, especially what was taking place in the 1850s, Dred Scott, Trail of Tears, all these other things coming together, and the Supreme Court, not just within the legal center, the Supreme Court, but policies, federal government and state governments. And I was just curious in your work how you bring that in, and also in the film, if that's also brought in terms of what was taking place at that time. Thank you.
No, well, thank you, and no, deeply interested in the connections between the different aspects of this settler colonial project in terms of the kind of mania to use violence to manage people's movements, to import folks through violence through the transatlantic slave trade, to expel people through violence through the different campaigns of Indian removal, to and to expel Chinese folks through the creation of the modern immigration system, and then that rolls out onto all these other racialized groups. We could talk about, what this system does, because one thing I guess I just want to mention, like people who defend this system, right? There was just an interview with Cecilia Munoz in the New York Times, Obama's immigration czar. It was the title was, "We Have a Border for a Reason," and she's been part of a chorus of voices saying that Democrats were too soft on immigration, and that's how we got here. Right? And in that, she talks about, we need to control immigration because it depresses the wages of Native workers. That's the argument, that too many immigrants are going to depress the wages. And it's something that's said so often, it's become a kind of fact just by saying it. But if we hold on for a second and look, does it? Does removing people increase the wages? Has there been an example of a mass deportation campaign around the planet where afterwards you get like a boost in people's wages, because if that theory was true, that's what you'd see. And we never see that. There's, after many different mass deportation events, you do not see an economic boost to the native worker. So the point is, what does this system do if it doesn't do that? What does it do? And this makes me think of your project, mapping deportations, and just looking at what this system actually has done. And I think it points to this intersectional analysis of, I don't know if you want to maybe just, I'll throw it to you on mapping deportations and what the system actually does, if it's not actually protecting workers' wages. What is it doing?
So he's mentioning mapping deportations, which you can look up on your phones or on your computer when you get home. What we've done is we've created a website with Ahilana Runalanatham, one of the leading immigration litigators today. He's running the TPS cases, and my colleague, Mariah So. And we've mapped every deportation that the federal government has ever recorded since 1896. That's more than 50 million deportations. And you can watch it on a map over time, and it shows you where people are being sent to. And what it shows you is that about 96, 97% of the people who've been kicked out of this country have all been returned to non-white countries. Mexico, China, mostly Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala. The point being is that deportation from its formation, certainly in this time period, if even not earlier, is a racial banishment project, hence the title of your film in some ways. And so that's what mapping deportations is. The thing about Fong Yu-ting is, the historian Natalia Molina talks about this. Once you create a certain kind of power, that script, as she calls it, doesn't stay with the group that it was created to contain initially. It always migrates and spreads. And that's certainly true with the power of deportation that was created in Fong Yu-ting. It just becomes laced into the heart of the system. Every single migrant who has come into contact with the US immigration system here or abroad, legally or illegally, has had to contend with the federal government's plenary, absolute, despotic powers when it comes to immigration control. Every single migrant since 1893. I don't care where you're coming from. So this is one of the lessons about why it's really important we pay attention to what's happening to other communities. Even if you're just thinking about your own community, right? It's gonna come for you. Once that power is created, those we have plenty of examples of, right? So as soon as we can stop it, as soon as we create and we provide and we protect justice for all, we're protecting it for ourselves as well. So that is the story of multiracial solidarity, right? Certainly.
We have time for our last question of the evening. I'm so sorry that we have to wrap up. And your name is?
Ricardo Dominguez. And I guess a two-part question. One is I'm part of a group called Electronic Disturbance Theater. And one of our concerns is that Homeland Security and the Trump administration has taken down apps like Ice Block, has forced Apple and Google. So we have developed with friends a non-app-based, browser-based witnessing so that we can alert communities, and it's called vecinos.is. The servers are not in the US, but in different parts of the world, so that it's much more difficult for them to take down ways for us to share information about where ICE has been located, vecinos.is. My other question is more for Alex, and having seen your work over the years, there has always been a sense of infiltration that is an individual giving themselves up. In Infiltrators, the character to break into the immigration breaks in. This character, historically, is breaking in. Even in Sleep Dealer, the digital is used to break into or infiltrate the system. So it's a way in which you've really organized, I think, your cinematic concerns. And in there is, how are you infiltrating AI in terms of making, especially since it's constituted as a site of aesthetic crisis? So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ricardo.
Thank you, Ricardo. And for those who don't know Ricardo Dominguez's work, find it because it's incandescent. And no, but in terms of infiltrating, I mean, I think it's kind of it's what we can do. It's very hard to step out of the matrix. It's very hard to step out of these systems and into some other realm because they're so total, they're inside us, they're inside of our communities, these logics, these regimes are all around us. And so these characters that are kind of like, well, I'm gonna throw myself at it. I'm gonna go into its bowels. I'm going to go into into prison to try to get out. Is to me, it is like a pattern or a kind of a repetitive theme in my work, but I think it's because it's a powerful phenomena in our reality, and it's what people who've been attacked by these regimes often come up with, and we see it today all around us, and I'm sure there's lots of knowledge about all of this in this room, and so I'm just really grateful for this moment to be together and just look forward to having better conversations, more two-way conversations after, and learning from you all. So with that, I guess I'll say thank you and pass to Moira.
Well, it's time for us to close. A round of applause to Kelly and Alex for this amazing and excellent conversation. Thank you to the MacArthur Foundation, Times of San Diego, Bread and Salt for co-presenting this program. You'll be able to find a summary of the program on the Zocalo Public Square website in the coming days, as well as interviews with Kelly and Alex. Please subscribe to our newsletters, podcast, and social media for more conversations. So at this point, we invite all of you to please stay for a reception featuring complimentary small bites and a tasting experience from Mujeres Brewhouse, and very special, everybody, a silk screening activation by Athenaeum Art Center featuring a limited edition poster by famed cartoonist Lalo Alcaraz, available for purchase to benefit Feeding San Diego. Thank you so much for joining us.